Listen up, fellow babies. It is time for Hold My Order Terrible Dresser. That is the Deep Dive History Nerd WKRP in Cincinnati podcast. I'm History Nerd number 1, Rob McDougall, and here is History Nerd number 2, Mike Grasso.
That's a very Dr. Seussian sort of thing 1 and thing 2 thing going on there. I like it.
That's us, Nerd 1 and Nerd 2. And today we are taking you back to, I believe, February of 1982 for 2 episodes from WKRP in Cincinnati's 4th and final season, I'll Take Romance and Circumstantial Evidence. And I think neither of us were bowled over with our enthusiasm for either of these episodes. Is that fair to say?
Do you remember that episode where it starts off, I think you used the clip of me going, wow, I was so blown away by these 2 episodes. This pair is the exact opposite. I was not in any way blown away by these 2 episodes. When I watched these last week, both of these 2 in a row, I just came out I think the best way to say it is I just came out completely cold to both of them. But again, I think they just played these season 4s a lot when I was growing up because I remember these episodes crystal clear, including a lot of the plot twists in both of these from childhood.
Yeah, I remember them well. I think we're going to have plenty to talk about.
I think that
the podcast episode should be just fine, folks, but we'll have plenty to talk about. I remember I'll Take Romance very well.
Yeah.
Circumstantial Evidence maybe less so. I remember, even as a kid, not liking this episode, I'll Take Romance. I was going to say, I think this is yet another, I think once a season they do this, they put Les into a romantic situation, and I mean, we could talk about it when we talk about it, but it always just seems to fall really flat, because I don't think the writers can figure out exactly what to do with Les with these star-crossed romance plot lines. Yeah, no, this episode just, as a kid, this episode just kind of always made me feel bad, you know? Bad for Les, bad for Lorraine, the prostitute, bad about prostitution. I mean, you know, there's first of all, I'm not sure what I knew or didn't know about what a hooker was when I was watching this. I mean, I can remember watching this as a teenager and knowing, but still just not liking the episode.
But just because you think you have a relationship that you really don't have doesn't mean that you're not worthy of having one if it's real. Said another way...
Are you trying to tell me that I'm not worthy of Lorraine?
No, I'm trying to tell you that Lorraine is not worthy of you.
She cost $200.
No, she charges $200. Les, I'm talking about the oldest profession.
Lorraine's a farmer?
And then, as you say, I think that, Les's love life episodes, Date with Jennifer, Les's groupie, I think they put you in a weird position vis-a-vis Les. You know, the rest of the cast, we've noticed this in all these Les episodes, they're all really fascinated by his love life, right? They're all sort of smirking and giggling. And I think the viewer is supposed to be that way, sort of smirking and giggling like, ho, 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 this little nerd, he's never going to get a woman. Yeah. And but you're supposed to simultaneously feel bad for him and root for him, but also laugh at him because he's so clueless. And I find it hard to do both of those, to sort of, pull off both of those at the same time.
That's a really good observation. I hadn't thought about that, but that combination of reactions has been inherent in every single one of these among the other characters on the show. And you're right, as the audience, those characters are our proxy, so we're expected to kind of giggle and elbow each other in the ribs. But Les, to a certain extent, is incredibly sincere. He is also incredibly private. And we've talked about this again and again throughout the podcast, is that we just don't know what his deal is.
What his deal is.
Is he experienced? Is he a virgin? Is he straight? Is he gay? All of these things that we've talked about again and again on the podcast, he keeps those very close to his chest. He makes the joke in this episode that kind of calls back to Andy's reference. I meet women the old fashioned way in bars. You know what I mean? I don't know whether that was him kind of parroting something that Andy had said or is actually sincerely how he meets women. But
he also says, when I want a woman, I can get one. And to me, that line just sort of like jumped out because I think I am pretty much decided now today in 2017, not when I watched this as a teenager.
Yeah.
My headcanon, I like the story that Les is gay. I'm sort of pretty much, I'm on board with Les being, I don't know. I still don't know what his deal is though. Like whether he's deep in denial or whether he's like a secret swinger. Like as you say.
Yeah. I've had that go back and forth myself quite a bit. But I'm kind of wondering if he's not like, again, maybe I'll get the terminology wrong here, but as the kids say today, maybe he's gray asexual, sort of like, when I want a woman, I will go out and pick one up and again, like, he's so cagey about it and so secretive about it. I mean, definitely one of the things that wouldn't be understood in this particular day and age. I mean, we've talked about homosexuality. We've talked about transgender characters and transgender rumors that have gone around the station. But in 1982, could you explain to someone what asexuality was or demisexuality or any of the other sort of, terminology that goes around today? Probably not.
No, definitely not. But I think the point is whatever sort of label you want to stick on Les, whether it's a 21st century label or a 1982 label, he is an oddball. He is a complicated
queer
man,
little
as
fellow,
he says,
right?
A queer little fellow.
Yeah.
And I am a big sucker actually for sort of stories that are the oddball finds their perfect match, but they haven't come close to presenting anybody. Like maybe I'd like these less stories if that's the other thing is that the writers have no idea who would be a good match for Les.
And he's kind of the guy that you want to have a happy ending. Like, if Andy settles down with someone, I don't really care. You know what I mean? If Johnny or Venus meets the perfect woman, that's not going to pull at my heartstrings the way, like, if by the end of the series, Les had found somebody to settle down with, like a hog farmer from Iowa or something like that. You know what I mean? That he meets at a, agricultural convention or something like that.
Exactly.
Like that would be, a great sort of happy ending. But obviously we're not going to get that. We know that from sort of, our history with the show and knowing what happens to Les in the next, 6 episodes. I mean, wouldn't that have been a great way to wrap up Les? You know what I mean?
That would be
get him his perfect match,
Fantastic. I mean, even if you couldn't do a gay storyline, have it be a female hog farmer or whatever.
That's kind of what was in my head just now.
Oh, I thought you were thinking some sort of Brokeback Mountain thing, which would have been awesome.
True, yeah. But I'm kind of picturing a broad-shouldered, Iowa sort of, female hog farmer who he meets at some kind of, agricultural convention or something like that.
How about this Lorraine?
Yeah, only Les's perfect match. Look at this. She likes dark-haired, outgoing men, bowling, and physical contact.
Sounds like your perfect match.
Tell me about it.
I don't want to go out with your perfect match, Herb.
She also likes wimpy guys who wear glasses and hog breeding.
She does?
No, but instead they, they've flirted with, he dated Jennifer.
Right.
Then there was, what's her name, who was crazy, who was basically crazy. And then here there's Lorraine, the prostitute. We haven't explained the premise of the episode, but I guess people can follow. It's not that complicated.
No, it's not. It's, Herb has got another dodgy client, a computer dating service, but it's actually a front for prostitution. Hilarity ensues, right? I mean, that's the right. Sort of,
And Les goes out on a date with this woman, and everyone is all goo-goo eyes and gaga at how gorgeous she is. But Jennifer realizes, well, actually, she tells Jennifer that that she is, in fact, a prostitute. The computer dating service is just a front.
Right.
And Jennifer has to break the news gently to Les, who, of course, has fallen for her.
Well, Lorraine, Les will be out in just a second.
Fashionably late, huh?
Oh, that's our Les.
Nice fur.
Thank you.
Is this your first date with Carlson?
Oh, it's not a date. I work for him.
Full time?
Uh-huh.
Well, that's even better than this computer dating scam. I'm not complaining. It sure beats working the streets.
It's not like you're rooting for Les to get together with Lorraine. Like, she's not a good match for him.
She's not. I mean, she's very sweet to him in the one scene that we have at the Cincinnati Broadcasters dinner dance, where Lorraine and Les go on a double date with Jennifer and the big guy. I mean, just to step aside for a moment, I did like the big guy in this episode quite a bit. I mean, I think I've been telling you over and over again the last few episodes of the podcast, Gordon Jump is knocking it out of the park this season. He keeps doing little things that just delight me. He goes to another bad Herb client, Tux for Bucks, and gets a quickie drive-through Tux fitting. And, of course, the tux does not fit at all. And so the entire time at the dinner dance, he's squeaking around in tiny shoes. He's waddling around in really, really tight pants. And he's also sitting right next to the kitchen. So the door to the kitchen keeps hitting him in the back. It's fantastic.
Slamming him every time. Yeah. That might be the best scene, or at least he's very good there. Yeah.
And so they're on a double date, and Les and Lorraine they have a little bit of a meet cute back and forth. But again, the underlying thing throughout this entire conversation is that we know Lorraine's a prostitute, so all of her lines are kind of weighted with a double entendre, essentially.
Right. Then Jennifer does break the news to Les as gently as she can.
Right.
The one line I always like that everyone probably remembers from this episode is she says she's talking about the oldest profession.
Yes.
And Lorraine's a farmer. But again, he should have hooked him up with a farmer. But almost immediately after she tells him, he says that Lorraine has just called him up and asked for another date. And Jennifer, and they sort of blow by this plot point a little bit too quickly, I think, because Jennifer says, "Oh, if she calls you, that means she really likes you." And
you pay up front for this service, right? Because the $200 is your computer match sort of fee, right? So if she's working outside of the bounds of the computer dating agency, maybe she is going to try to get Les to pony up some more money for another date. But I think what Jennifer's assuming here is that they actually hit it off, which might be a little naive now that you mention it.
So one of two things is going on. One is that no, she doesn't like him. She's just gonna, milk him for a little bit more money.
Right.
And two is that, and I assume we're supposed to take it this way, that, oh, she really likes him. Yeah. But there's just there's no groundwork laid for that in the first half.
That's a good point. If there had been more actual chemistry, I could maybe believe it. Because of course, sex workers date, you know what I mean? They have social lives and romantic lives outside of their work. If we had seen, Les be charming in his innocent way and Lorraine kind of start falling for him, it'd be a different story. But I don't think that conversation at the dinner dance actually earns that kind of supposition.
No. And I think we'll talk a little bit later about the whole sort of soiled dove, hooker with a heart of gold kind of trope.
Yeah.
But I'm just kind of, I said I'm a huge sucker for oddball finds a perfect match stories, but I'm not so much a sucker for nice guy earns sex as some kind of prize because he's nice sort of stories.
Sure. Yeah, that's a good point.
I feel like this is sort of what they have come up with here.
Yeah. And I think that, to be honest, one of the reasons why I didn't like this episode is because I feel like the first half was a whole lot of nothing. And it was kind of the same stuff we've seen again and again with less romance plot lines, which is, again, the people at the station kind of having a good old snicker over it, and everybody being really interested in finding out who would actually, be matched with Les on a computer dating service. So, by the time you get about a little more than halfway through the episode, at that point, that's the point when you find out about Lorraine. And so there's no time to kind of establish any kind of, like I said earlier, any kind of chemistry between the two of them.
Yeah, we never see Lorraine again after the reveal.
That's
right,
true.
After it's been revealed to Les. She doesn't come back.
She's just on the phone, I think. Yeah. So it's So, this is what we mean by it being kind of an episode that kind of fell flat. There's all kinds of interesting ways they could have gone here, but they don't choose to go down any of those paths. And, there's a lot of Herb in this episode, and there's a lot of Herb being, because again, he kind of filled out the questionnaire for himself, but put Les's name on it. So
right.
Lorraine is technically Herb's great match, but again, since we know there isn't actually a computer putting these people together, that's kind of moot anyway. But
right, Lorraine's everyone's perfect match because, in fact, Andy also fills out a questionnaire.
That's right, at the end of the episode. I don't think there's any problem right now, Rob, with us moving on away from the episode itself and into the stuff that really interested us with respect to this episode. I mean, there's a lot on the historical and cultural side here that is incredibly intriguing to talk about and is very much of this time period and of this era.
Yes, absolutely. I think that, I mean, you said the first half of the episode is a whole lot of nothing.
Yeah.
And mostly the first half of the episode is everybody batting around this crazy concept, which is computer dating, which is not dating a computer. It's a computer matching people up together.
Well, Venus wants to meet the computer. He's interested in finding out more about it. Maybe when he saw Max through the window back in season 2, you know, is like, oh, computers, eh? I'd like to learn more about those. But yeah, like this episode, again, there's no real computer dating service. It's all a front. But the fact that this dating agency in Kentucky can use it as a front tells you that by 1982, people were at least familiar with the idea in a sort of greater sort of cultural sense in the United States that you could go to an agency, fill out a form, have them put it onto a punch card and match you up with your perfect date via computer.
It's so marvelously intriguing and titillating because WKRP, we've said, has this deep anxiety about computers and automation, and they hit all those notes in this episode. People talk about, Les says, oh, it's so cold and inhuman. He says, to me, a person is more than just data on a computer printout.
Yeah.
You got to remember that up until the explosion of personal computers and the internet, certainly in the 50s, 60s, 70s, people still, when they thought of computers, they thought of they thought of Macs, they thought of the big IBM mainframes, and computers were just sort of like the avatar of soulless automation, the military industrial complex, the Berkeley free speech movement in the 1960s when Mario Savio gave the famous speech about the machine. The students protesting, some of the students wore punch cards around their necks to sort of that said, do not fold, spindle, or mutilate. The idea being that they were sort of, the computer represented what modern society, the sort of conformity and automation was doing to people.
Probably a young undergraduate named George Lucas probably got pretty inspired by that and made his first short film about that very idea. Yeah.
Exactly. This is, I think we've talked before about Fred Turner's Counterculture to Cybercrime. Have we talked on the podcast about this book?
Maybe we've talked about it in the show notes. I don't know if we've gone deep, on the podcast about it.
Just very briefly, this is a great book by someone I know, from Counterculture to Cyberculture by historian Fred Turner. And it focuses on Stuart Brand, and he's a great story, but maybe a story for another day. But the kind of larger story is, how did it come to be that, that computers went from being, as I say, the sort of symbol of the military industrial complex to being by the 1990s, symbol of, empowerment and instruments of creative liberation sort of thing.
And personal networking, too, to a certain extent. Sort of like the unfeeling part somehow dropped out. And to be honest, it's stuff like this idea about computer dating that humanized the computer, right? Because all of a sudden, the data isn't just being used to, mark missile trajectories or, predict people's consumption patterns. There's a one-on-one sort of personal connection ostensibly being made through the computer. So all of a sudden, again, all that impersonal stuff you were talking about, all that military industrial stuff you were talking about, it's made friendly. It's made user friendly. It's these pioneers and stuff like computer dating that allowed this to happen. And I mean, we tried to find computer date zero, and it's really difficult. There's a lot of candidates out there.
It is because that's the key, is that once the computer becomes a communication device, once it puts people in contact with other people, then it's no longer this sort of necessarily this terrifying machine. Now, of course, the anxiety of our current era is, what has it done to us that all of our human interactions are squeezed through these algorithms and these programs that, that actually have other purposes, that we are the product, right? This is, when you go on social media, you are the product.
Can I do my Adam Curtis impression? But then a funny thing happened.
Yep. And you see in this episode something that I think about a lot, even today, when people talk about sort of their anxieties about, how much of our world is shaped and run by hidden algorithms, is that there's, on the one hand, deep anxieties about the computer, but on the other, huge and I would say almost completely unjustified faith in the algorithm. In other words, people keep repeating that Lorraine must be Les's perfect match, right? And that she's going to be this perfect match. Jennifer says she's programmed to like you. The sort of idea that somehow the computer is going to take out all the uncertainty of dating, and through its brilliance, she's going to be perfect for him. When in fact, I mean, of course, we know that the whole thing is just a front for prostitution, but even real computer dating, like computer dating in 1982, I imagine it's not perhaps that sophisticated.
Maybe they take one pile of punch cards and then the other pile, shuffle them, and then basically just match people. I mean, that's there's a gimmick aspect to computer dating, like going all the way back to the 60s when these people were kind of developing the idea. It just seemed like a logical next step. I mean, like I said, we've dug up all of these possible examples.
Let's talk about Computer Date Zero.
I'm excited to talk about this because I had heard one of these stories very, very early on, like 4 or 5 years ago. In fact, before we even did the podcast, I had read one of these stories. This is about the Harvard group.
Yes.
And I find it just unnervingly just creepy how similar the story of these computer dating guys in the mid-ish 60s is, how similar the story is to the story of Facebook. I mean, it's creepily familiar. And the people who were part of this, Operation Match, right, at Harvard in 1965, these people actually went on to be as big movers and shakers as someone like Zuckerberg.
Yes. Well, let's not get ahead of ourselves. Let's tell the Operation Match story first. The story that you will usually hear if you say, when was the first computer date? I think the one that people think of first is this one at Harvard. It's always, it's got to be Harvard, right? That's where there are nerds looking
enterprising young men looking to find dates and rank women on whether they're hot or not. It is a thing at Harvard.
There was, of course, a kind of mystique about the computer back then. It had a legitimacy that maybe your buddy Tom or your girlfriend Sarah would not have in saying, oh, this is the perfect girl or the perfect guy for you. The computer was much smarter.
They said that if the computer matched us, there must be some reason we were matched. And they would spend days finding out the reason, and then they got to know each other.
The initial income from it was something like $24,000. It cost about $3,000 to go to Harvard.
And this is at a time when Harvard was still all male in 1965,
yes,
right?
That
Radcliffe was the women's auxiliary to Harvard.
Sure.
And they took classes together, but Cliffies, the women from Radcliffe, they were banned from the dormitories, they were banned from the library, and they had these social mixers. And the article I'm looking at says that these guys, Jeff Tarr, Dave Crump, Von Morrill, had come to the conclusion, see if this sounds like anyone at Harvard, had come to the conclusion that college mixers were, quote, a particular social evil, awkward events that were half cocktail party, half dance, and all disappointment. What could be done to short-circuit this painful process of meeting women?
Oh, my God. Yeah, I mean, what has changed in the last 50 years when it comes to men who have trouble dealing with women in the real world? Absolutely nothing has changed. Where this takes us is that the opportunity came to make some money and to actually start a business off of this. They charged people $3 a piece to send in their questionnaires and, get matched up.
Yeah, I think that in fact, this is a truism of history of technology, is that you invent something and people are like, I wonder if I could use this to get laid, whatever the device is. Because it was Harvard, these guys got publicity. That's the key, is that these guys got publicity because it was Harvard. They got press from the campus newspaper and actually national newspaper. And one of the guys this was through a family connection, ended up on a quiz show, To Tell the Truth, which was a CBS quiz show. One of these ones where a mystery guest comes on and the panel has to guess what's the funny story about you. And the funny story was, I'm the Harvard student who invented computer dating.
Yeah.
So this is the computer date zero that most people know of. So as we say, the real story, it's always a little bit more complicated. That quote I just read a moment ago about the dudes not wanting to interact with women, I take from an online article by a historian of computing named Marie Hicks. And she tells this story, which I just discovered today, of a woman named Joan Ball, sort of a working class woman in England, former shop girl who worked at a marriage bureau.
From a very troubled background, too.
Right.
Know?
She'd been in mental hospital, but she worked at a marriage bureau, which is a
matchmaking service.
Dating service. Basically, it's a pre-computerized dating service. Dating services are not, in fact, brand new. They existed even before there were computers. And she had a knack for pairing people up. Unlike the Harvard dudes, she was sort of a people person and like good with interpersonal interactions. And interestingly, she had the key insight that when matching people up for the marriage bureau, the most important thing was not asking people what they were looking for. It was asking them what they didn't want, asking them what their deal breakers were.
Yeah.
And that's just much more efficient to get the deal breakers down and then see what happens. So she launched a marriage bureau, which is what these were called. But this was a really hard thing to do in Britain in the early 1960s because people assumed that marriage bureaus were fronts for prostitution. They were sort of considered so sketchy and suspicious that just like this episode, they just assumed that, and so she couldn't get it advertised until bringing in another pop culture thing that both of us are fans of. She started advertising on 1960s British pirate radio.
Yeah, which is the only place you could advertise before sort of they allowed commercial radio over the actual airwaves, and they weren't pirate stations. So in the mid 1960s, if you wanted to listen to rock and roll, you couldn't hear it on the BBC. You had to listen to those offshore radio stations.
And so they were playing these in between, The Who and the Kinks. They were playing ads for this computer dating service.
It's a perfect place to do it too. You got a guaranteed young crowd who wants to get out there and mingle, and it's sort of the perfect venue for it. But I want to talk about what happened to those Harvard guys, because as you say, they had all the hype, they had all the family connections, they had all the money, and I want to talk about where these guys ended up. A couple of them have real big names that, again, if you are somebody who grew up in the 80s and was a little bit conscious of the stuff going on in the Reagan administration, two of these names will be very familiar to you. We haven't talked about them yet. Douglas Ginsburg was a Supreme Court nominee under Reagan and late in Reagan's second term. He was one of the guys who was nominated for the Supreme Court but got his candidacy scuttled because he smoked marijuana. And he ended up becoming like a federal judge. But his was one of those several Supreme Court nominations that went by the wayside just because of a little pot in the 60s. The other member of the Operation Match group that was their West Coast representative was the son of Caspar Weinberger.
Jesus. These are heavy. I mean, I guess it's Harvard. It makes sense. But these are heavy hitters, sort of, conservative neocon. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
And I think he had a job in the Reagan administration on the Voice of America TV network. So he stayed in telecommunications and computers and basically got a great job thanks to his dad. Good to see that, again, Republicans respect that strong strain of nepotism that they've been shoving down our throats for the last 35 years. It's plus ça change, right? I mean, seriously.
But, even telling this as a story of Joan Ball versus the Harvard guys is also too simple. That I think that, as you say, that this idea was just bubbling up. I think that it is one of the first things people think of when they get a computer. Is like,
yes,
how can I use this to date? And the reason I know that, or the evidence I have for that, is coming very close to my own family, is that my in-laws, my wife's parents, they met at Oberlin College in 1965. They were both students at Oberlin College, and they were fixed up on a computer date.
Well, I mean, there you go. I mean, that's the same year all this other stuff was going on, so that just proves that it was going on everywhere, even little Oberlin College.
Yes, yeah, exactly. I have this delightful little article from the Oberlin Alumni magazine that they ran a few years ago. Paul Lewis was a freshman interested in early computer programming when Lewis had the idea of using computer programming to match compatible dates. In this one, it wasn't a service. It was like a sort of a fundraiser. They all did it on one night. So everybody, like a whole bunch of people on campus all filled out the forms, their interests, their hobbies, what they looked for in a date. And then they got their results. And then there was a dance that they all went to. My father-in-law, Mike, and my mother-in-law, Janice, didn't know each other. And they went on a date, and she was already dating somebody. So they but they still went on this date as people did back then. People weren't exclusive in that way in those days.
So what happened? How did this end up becoming a thing where they dated and married? I mean, that's crazy.
It is crazy. It's crazy and awesome. Yeah, no. So let me see. It's they went out on the one date. She was dating somebody else. The article says Mike says Janice was dating someone else at the time, but that didn't deter him from asking her out on another date. And they're both seniors, and they kind of went their separate ways after commencement. But Mike got back in touch with her like a few months after graduation. He just sent her a card and got in touch with her. And they started dating, and they got married like a year later. And they are, it's their 50th wedding anniversary this year.
Oh, wow. That's amazing.
So it's pretty amazing. And like Mike definitely says that he, wouldn't have met her anyway. Like Oberlin was a small place, but they were in different circles. They weren't,
wow.
She was French major and he was like politics. He was a lawyer. And so, yeah. And they, that it was the computer is the reason they met.
Jesus, that's great. Well, I mean, this really gets to what I wanted to talk about, which is just how much, again, we talked about this, how much computer networking and the sort of internet revolution has changed dating.
Yeah.
Andy and Les make the joke about, I meet my women the old-fashioned way in bars, but like, I mean, Christ, I've never met anyone in a bar. I mean, I have to be honest with you, Rob. I think every single person I have dated or kind of dated has been somebody I have met through the internet. And this is going back to 1994. I mean, that's, I was an early adopter. What can I say? I was on IRC. I met my first girlfriend there. And from then on, it was basically just, one meeting over the internet after another. I've had my share of, good and bad dates, but hey, I'm married now, and, I met my wife, Jenny, over the internet as well. So
over the internet. Oh, specifically, you met her over what?
I met her on the Live Journal.
The Live Journals. It's not back when it was not just a Russian spam spyware center.
We have to stop and pick up my date.
I thought Dr. Girlfriend was going to be there.
Yes, with that dink phantom limp. I plan to use the never-fail strategy of jealousy.
Who's your date?
I met her on the Live Journal, which I kept in prison. I have been blogging. After posting an especially attractive picture of my prison-sculpted abs, she commented that I was not only oin, I was sex, whatever that means.
But again, I've met people from OkCupid before. Like I've used, I mean, that's kind of old nowadays. So these days, the kids, they what are they on? The Tinders now?
The Tinders, the Grinders. Yeah. Well, like, see, this is, you're going to have to get that, was it a Mr. Show clip about, the generational differences between being born in the mid 70s and being born in the early 70s? Because I met my wife the old fashioned way, Mike, in a bar.
I would say that in that time period, in the mid to late 90s, like there were people who didn't want to date people from the internet because it had a bad reputation. Not necessarily in the same way as this stuff does, where it's like, oh, it's creepy, oh, it's weird. But like the fact that you didn't get to see people back, that like there was no video, like live video or anything like that. Maybe you send a picture, but that picture might not be very representative of the way you look. So it's interesting. Like,
well, and there was so much anxiety about meeting people on the internet, and the internet sort of like conjures up this sort of like
the old line is nobody knows you're a dog on the internet, right?
Yeah. Right. And so then to like take that the next step and actually have your romantic life come from the internet. There was a period where we were all like the WKRP cast, kind of standing in the lobby giggling, going,
oh
then,
yeah,
you know, we got over it because it ended up just to be interacting with people, but.
Maybe I won't have to tell him. Maybe he figured it out all by himself. No.
Maybe Les is the man that will turn this girl around and make her leave that sordid life forever.
Bailey, what movie did you and Johnny see the other night?
Cinderella?
Yeah, going back to, you know, my issues with this episode, which I haven't completely figured out. You know, the thing I said before about Jennifer's certainty that, oh, if she calls Les back, that means that she really likes him. It felt like it was some kind of a, you know, rescue fantasy crossed with nice guyism. And basically what this is all walking around is the kind of, you know, huge classic ancient trope of the hooker with the heart of gold.
Yeah.
Right? Which is...
well, Bailey even references it directly, right? Like, maybe Les can save her from this, you know, awful life that she's having. And then she says, oh, you know, Johnny and I went to go see Cinderella on Friday.
Cinderella.
Yeah.
That's well, yeah. Is Cinderella, is it metaphorically about a prostitute? I don't know. She's
to rescue her from her life of drudgery
from her life of drudgery,
life. Yeah, it's interesting. I hadn't thought about that, but that could be a hidden subtext there. Maybe the original pre-Grimm fairy tale versions are a little bit more sleazy. But yeah, like Bailey calls it out, and there's this definite sort of like anti-sex worker kind of mentality going on here, you know, and. You know, again, in 1982, you can't really expect people to have that kind of progressive view about things, but the way that people always feel like that life can be redeemed, quote unquote, is by meeting the right guy. I mean, you put down all these examples from the WKRP time period in the notes. Like, I mean, Risky Business is like right around this time. And
yep.
Boy, talk about a formative film for young men in the 80s to watch and get their opinions about, you know, men and women from. My God.
I mean, why does Rebecca De Mornay fall for Tom Cruise? Is it just because he's Tom Cruise?
He's Tom Cruise, man. Yeah. I mean,
that's enough reason, I guess. But that's the
same thing as Pretty Woman later, like 7 years later. It's like, oh, it's Richard Gere. I mean, you know, it's just, it's, you know, it is what it is.
I'm not saying that it's, you know, yeah, there's a whole question about being sex worker positive. I'm not going to say that it's a bad thing for someone to not want to be a prostitute, but
sure.
It just, even that phrase "hooker with a heart of gold," the implication there is that all the other hookers don't.
Yeah.
And just any patriarchal society that is sort of like simultaneously obsessed with women's sexuality and also deeply judgmental of it is going to be fascinated by this seeming paradox, right?
Yeah.
And have this fantasy of the Scarlet Woman who will cease to be a Scarlet Woman for you.
Yeah.
Right? I actually learned the phrase, you mentioned Risky Business. I learned the phrase and learned about the cliche, the hooker with a heart of gold, watching the movie Corvette Summer.
MGM presents Corvette Summer.
Somebody stole my Stingray and the word's out it's in Vegas.
You got a Corvette?
Starring Mark Hamill, who's back from Star Wars.
Oh, yeah!
And Annie Potts, who's out of this world.
You're gonna spend the night. Comprende, amigo?
If he knew as much about girls as he does about cars, he wouldn't be so nervous.
Peel off them duds, sailor, and let me see what you got.
Sure.
And if she knew as much about cars as she does about boys,
what do you drink?
She wouldn't be so jealous.
Motor oil?
And if you knew as much as they know about this candy apple metal flake Corvette, you'd be chasing it too.
I'm helping you, dope. I'm helping you find your car.
You run up against a car thief, you're liable to wind up at the bottom of Lake Mead.
1978, and
Mark Hamill, Annie Potts, is that right?
Mark Hamill and Annie Potts, and and I can remember I watched this on television with my parents, and so I don't know, I must have been, you know, like quite young. I don't even know if I knew what a hooker was. But in this movie, and this is my memory from like 1980. Like I haven't seen the movie since, so I might have this wrong. But basically, Annie Potts is a prostitute in training, is how she describes herself, or something like that. Like
she's a Padawan learner. I mean, is that where?
Yeah. So Mark Hamill has this gorgeous Corvette that
he has the titular Corvette, right?
The titular Corvette that he's restored until it gets stolen. That's the plot of the movie. He's trying to get it back, but he meets this very forward girl, a very young Annie Potts. She comes on to him. They have sex. And then after they have sex, she reveals that she's a prostitute and wants him to pay her. And then he doesn't, or maybe he does, but then she reveals that she's not actually a prostitute yet. She's like, wants to be one, and she's on her way to Las Vegas to make it as a hooker.
Wow. It's like the all-American success story, right? Go to the big city and, apply your trade. But I mean, that's...
But then it's sort of like, so then she never quite brings herself to become a prostitute. So it's like the perfect soiled dove. She's not even soiled yet, right? Like she comes onto him. He gets to have this forward girl come onto him and have sex with him. And then, boom, she immediately ceases to be an actual prostitute and joins him in his shenanigans. I might have that completely wrong.
That sounds right. Well, this gets me thinking, okay, because in the notes, I put down all of these movies with really, really grim stories of prostitution, right? Taxi Driver, you got Jodie Foster, underage prostitute. Looking for Mr. Goodbar isn't really prostitution, but Diane Keaton is kind of like this grimly sexually liberated woman who, ends up running into...
It's about the rewards of this is what you get when you're sexually liberated.
Are we looking at a 70s to 80s thing again, Rob? Are we seeing a trajectory here of the early 70s having all of these stories of really, really grim, kind of dangerous prostitution stories, and then Corvette Summer, Risky Business, Pretty Woman, capitalism takes hold and people are go-getters and they're going to go to the big city and make it big, or they're going to marry Richard Gere and get out of the life. Like, is this another story?
That's right. All those movies presented as sort of like that. I think you're completely right. And of course, in Taxi Driver also plays with the rescue fantasy. I mean, Travis Bickle is acting out the rescue fantasy, but in that, he indirectly he saves her, I guess, but it's presented as, the fantasy is clearly presented as dangerous, as delusional, solipsistic. His delusion that he is a white knight saving her.
Right.
But Risky Business, Corvette Summer, I can't remember exactly how it went, but basically my parents, like, they might have been uncomfortable watching this. They were like letting me watch it because it was Luke Skywalker.
Right, and, exactly.
So they might have been uncomfortable.
Corvette Summer doesn't exactly say, like, maybe it's a sex comedy, but not this kind of sex comedy. You know what I mean?
Yeah, so they might have been uncomfortable, but one of them, can't remember if it was mom or dad, just sort of snorted in derision and said something about the hooker with the heart of gold. And I was like, what's that? What's that? And so that's where I learned about the hooker with the heart of gold.
There's a special kind of magic in the air when you find another heart that needs to share. Baby, come to me. Let me put my arms around you. This was meant to be. And I'm also glad I found you. Need you every day. Gotta have your love around me, baby. Always stay. 'Cause I can't go back to living without you. Spending every time.
I just want to do one quick bit, because again, I'm trying to just squeeze as much music as I can. I mean, there's not a ton, interesting that's being played. I think, Johnny plays B.B. King early in this episode, if I'm not mistaken. But there's a poster that's I think replaced the George Benson poster, or at least is on the door of the booth. Patty Austin's 1982 album, Every Home Should Have One. And I'm really excited to talk about this because not only is Patty Austin a certified woman of yacht, but we had a Labor Day barbecue a couple of weeks ago here in Boston. Got rained out, so we had to come inside, and I put on my playlist. And I put on, Patty Austin's Baby Come to Me came on, and everybody in the room, early Gen Xers, late Gen Xers, early millennials, they all started singing along to this song. It was a moment as a DJ for parties I'm never going to forget. And it was just the broad appeal of this Patty Austin, James Ingram duet, Baby Come to Me, which was a huge, huge hit in 1982, but also got played a ton on the radio in the 80s on, the nighttime smooth jazz, quiet storm stations. So, seeing Patty Austin's album cover on the door of the booth was another great early 80s musical memory I wanted to share. But man, 35 years later, Patty Austin's still getting people to sing along.
She still got it.
Yeah,
nice.
It was a great, great moment.
Venus, these are Sergeants Alcorn and Davies.
Air Force?
Police.
Traffic?
I'm Gordon Sims, also known as Venus Flytrap.
Yeah, what's this all about? Crime.
The burglary of a wholesale jeweler in this building. Are you familiar with a woman named Jessica Langtree?
Yeah, where is she?
We have her in custody.
Custody for what? Mr. Sims, you're under arrest.
Hey, you guys need a warrant for that?
Yeah, you got a warrant for this?
Of course we have a warrant. We're professionals.
Would you put your hands behind your back, please?
Well, is that really necessary?
I'm afraid so.
Mr. Sims, you have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. You have the right to talk to the lawyer, have him present with me.
Hey, Venus.
Hi, Mr. Carlson.
How's it going?
Real good.
Well, good.
Our second episode today is called Circumstantial Evidence. In this episode, Venus is doing what he does at the beginning of many episodes of WKRP, romancing a young lady. But this time he's not doing it in the booth at WKRP. He is in the bullpen, and he's put on a tape of himself. This is very important information that you're going to want to know about later on in this episode. The young lady, played by Daphne Maxwell, who we saw in the Real Families episode as one of the hosts of Real Families.
Yeah, Venus is macking on the host of Real Families.
No, it's a completely different person. The upshot of this episode is that Andy interrupts, as usual. That kind of is another common trope with Venus making time on a woman in the station after dark. Jessica leaves the bullpen and leaves the station. And the next morning we find out that she and an accomplice robbed a jewelry dealer in the Flynn building. And she's fingered Venus to the authorities as her accomplice. Venus is arrested, and he is put through a pre-trial hearing to see if a grand jury needs to be impaneled to basically prosecute Venus as the accomplice. And we spend most of the second half of the episode in the courtroom as the cast of WKRP acts as character witnesses for one Gordon Sims.
Rather ineffectively acting as character witnesses, yeah.
Hilarity ensues again, folks. And I use that with scare quotes.
Let's say he did do it.
All right.
You would still have to prove it. That's the law.
Yes.
Smoking gun.
Yes. Mr. Nesman, do you know if Mr. Sims has ever been involved in a crime before?
Just the one time when he broke into a photographer's studio to steal some photographs of a friend of ours who was naked at the time, but that was different. He had to. It wasn't his idea.
Oh, perfect.
Yep, it's Venus faces a Kafkaesque nightmare that just gets worse and worse, and that's your sitcom episode.
This one's a tough sell. I mean, there's a lot we can talk about in this episode, Rob, but this is another one, second episode in a row. It just didn't work for me on any level. The performances were kind of weird and flat. Asking Venus to be put in this situation as a character is uncomfortable on a ton of levels. The humor doesn't land. The scenario is a little unbelievable, given that this woman apparently was able to plot out multiple traps to basically frame and entrap Venus. Just seems like a lot of trouble to go through to rob a jewelry store. But I will say, this must have been a pretty big burglary, because the bail for Venus was $200,000 in 1982, which also seems completely unbelievable. That's like murder level bail. I mean, I don't know.
Murder bail.
The first thing is that this episode could have been very, very different, right? I mean, that the first thing that we should talk about is that this episode was originally designed, according to Jamie Wyman's blog, to be an hour-long episode, right?
Yes, I think this is in the Castle book also.
Oh, okay.
So this episode was actually written by Tim Reed and PJ Tarakve together, co-written. Just knowing what we know about Tim Reed, you got to think that he might have been going for a kind of a message episode about black men and the legal system and, and how circumstantial evidence can be used to convict them.
And I have to be honest, when I was trying to think back to this episode, that's what I remembered this episode being like, is basically a, mistaken identity because Venus was the only black guy in the area, as opposed to Jessica using all of these elements to try and frame him.
Yeah, because it doesn't really work as a message episode about the law for a number of reasons. Venus he is innocent, but it's not like he's just picked up in a random traffic stop. He's the victim of an elaborate frame-up, by, as it happens, an African-American woman. There's a black police officer, the prosecutor is black, which maybe is neither here nor there, but it muddies the waters of whether this is a racial story. And then the ending, I think, completely sort of invalidates, right? Because...
Yeah. The very ending of the episode involves the actual accomplice of Jessica being brought in on a related charge. The arresting officer, played by Michael Pataki, Ivan, from the Americanization of Ivan, looks at the guy standing next to Venus and goes, "Oh boy, I can't believe this." Now, these two men look very different. I mean, it's not, there's no way that there could be any kind of mistaken identity on this front. They are different heights. They have very different looking facial features. It's incredibly poorly delivered, that final sort of scene.
A possible explanation for how this all went awry is that, according to the Castle book, this was supposed to be a two-parter.
Yeah.
That they were going to have an hour to tell this story, and that they had to hack it down to the 26 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
And so obviously a lot had to come out. I'm still not sure that it would have worked, but maybe there could have been more.
I think the plot would have to be very different. It would have to be, like, again, for it to be a message episode, for it to be kind of worthy of that amount of time, it would have to be literally a case of mistaken identity because the culprit was black. Venus gets arrested automatically because he was in the building that night. And, all the different things that Jessica uses to entrap him, like, sneaking her into the building and, giving him the earring that kind of puts him with some of the merchandise that was stolen. Like, when Venus says it's Kafkaesque, I was just sitting there thinking to myself, hey, I identified this as a Kafkaesque plot, and it's unrealistic in that way, and that sort of like nightmarish kind of quality to it. It doesn't approach any of the issues that you would expect Tim Reed to want to talk about through an episode like this. I think about an episode like Who is Gordon Sims, way back in the first season, and how effectively that episode deals with ideas of being anti-war and the anti-Vietnam War movement, and addresses even the racial aspect of Venus's sort of service and his going AWOL, like, just so well. And this episode really just becomes an excuse for a whole bunch of, like, quick one-liner jokes in the courtroom. And it just, it's disappointing on so many levels.
Good heavens! This is a palace! How in the world can you afford to live in a house like this, Simpson?
I don't know. Don't ask me how the economy works.
Yeah, but look at the size of this place. I live in a single room above a bowling alley and below another bowling alley.
Wow.
I'm sorry, isn't that...
Yeah, that's me, all right. And the guy standing next to me is President Gerald Ford. And this is when I was on tour with the Smashing Pumpkins. Oh, and here's a picture of me in outer space.
You? When in outer space? You?
Sure. You've never been? Would you like to see my Grammy Award?
No, I wouldn't.
You know what it's a bit like? It's a bit like the Frank Grimes episode of The Simpsons. Go with me on this. The reason that it is that, like, what makes it Kafkaesque, and I would have to say that probably the funniest part of the episode for me, it's not hilarious, but is that sort of the montage of everyone being terrible character witnesses for Venus. It just, let's say he did do it. And the sort of Johnny Cochran-esque lawyer kind of leans forward and yes. What makes it Kafkaesque is all the crap that comes out that is continuity from other episodes. So in other words, like it comes up that, Venus almost shot Andy one night. And then there was the time that he broke into the photographer's studio.
Every single time they've danced on the edge of criminal behavior is trotted out. They didn't mention Venus's being AWOL, did they?
They don't mention Venus as being AWOL.
But that would be a perfect thing to slip in there,
But the reason I say it's like the Frank Grimes episode of The Simpsons, which is, hugely controversial, right? Because some people think that's
we can't talk about it in this household between me and Jenny. I think it's the worst episode of The Simpsons. It's worse than the Armin Tarnzarian episode. And Jenny loves it. And we still can't talk about it. It causes fights.
Well, okay, so that's interesting to me because I think that the reason that it's such a hot button thing is that it changes the level of reality of the show, right? Yep. So it holds the wacky life of a sitcom character up to a different paradigm, a more realistic level of scrutiny.
Yes, that's a very good point.
And it is really weird and uncomfortable. And and so you're like, oh shit, it would suck to be Venus and have all this stuff that you come back to, this sort of wacky, zany sitcom stuff is going to look really bad when you're in a real serious courtroom. It's like the episode has just like the Grimes episode, it's operating on a slightly different, in that episode it's just the one guy is operating on a different level of realism than everybody else. And it just makes it's Philip K. Dickian as well as being Kafkaesque because it makes the whole world seem unreal.
Yeah. Next week, we're going to go back to everything being wacky. See, that's the thing with this. When you step outside of the sitcom genre convention and you put sitcom characters into a serious situation, there's two ways you can go about it. You can make it entirely serious, or you can do something like An Explosive Affair. Very serious stakes in that episode, but we're always laughing. There's joke after joke after joke, and even though we know there's a bomb at the transmitter.
You're right, but I would say there's a difference between this and Gordon Sims in that the Gordon Sims episode is dead serious.
Yes.
But this episode, it's serious, and then it points that serious lens at the silliness of the show. And there's a kind of there's a mismatch of verisimilitude or mimesis. And this is why I think of the Frank Grimes episode is that there's this kind of it breaks the frame of the show because it's working on two levels.
Right.
And it's just feels strange. I also think of Philip K. Dick because I think that this is the kind of thing, and maybe this is how you feel about the Grimes episode. This is the kind of thing that can break your connection to the show long term. Once you watch it, you can't watch it in the same way anymore.
Yeah, I don't know if it doesn't go that far for me, but I think there's a couple of interesting things I want to talk about here that relate to this, and I'm seeing them in a new light now. One, again, Jamie Weinman's entry on this episode is kind of crucial. We'll definitely link to it in the show notes, maybe even in the Monday post. He says this episode was not shot before a live studio audience.
Yes.
Now think about that for a second in relation to what you're talking about. That makes a lot of sense. It takes the pressure about making this funny completely off. You don't have a live studio audience to react to or to give you sort of the laugh line, the sort of laugh spaces that you would get in an ordinary episode. And the other thing that it gets me thinking about is the scene with Johnny and Venus talking to each other through the sort of cliche prison glass, right?
Right.
Johnny comes in, he's wearing a false beard. We know Johnny's had some trouble with the law down in Mexico. That's totally, again, within continuity and totally funny. But then Venus brings out the sort of classic, there's three guys in here who want to dance with me jokes. Uh-huh. And again, at that point, you can kind of tell...
Some lighthearted prison rape comedy.
You can tell it's a laugh track at that point because it's one of those situations where the joke probably wouldn't have landed maybe the same way as it does with that sweetened sort of, canned laughter. And again, in 2017, that's not really funny. So you have that added level of sort of self-awareness to go onto too. So I think that there's a lot going on here. It's actually more of an interesting episode maybe than I thought it was going to be. You can definitely risk jumping the shark in a situation like this. I don't think this rises to that.
Oh, I don't think it does either. It actually won't take long to get the sort of, wash the taste of it out of my brain. But, this show veers between silly and serious all the time.
Sure.
But something else happens when you attempt to mash those two together. Another thing that's going on here, and Jamie Weinman points this out, is I think part of this we have to lay at the feet of Tarakve, the other writer.
Yeah.
And Tarakve went to law school.
Yeah.
Jamie points out, and says, you can hear that. It's sort of like she's really like making a point of getting her legal education on screen.
Yeah.
Here. And there's a whole lot of legal business. Like they given how tightly they have to move to get this whole story done, they spend a long time on like letting Max Wright explain what circumstantial evidence is.
Yeah, it's cute because Bailey gets to answer all the questions correctly. And, I guess amongst all of her architecture and labor history courses, she took a couple pre-law courses as an undergrad too.
Yeah, she's like Hermione Granger, just getting the question right, which is adorable.
Please, Rob.
Circumstantial evidence is something else again. It's a puzzle. It's like a puzzle. It's just, let me give you an example. There's an isolated house in the middle of a field, a body on the living room floor, a bullet hole in the living room window, footprints in the newly fallen snow leading directly from the window to our man standing alone at the edge of the field. Is he guilty?
Maybe he just looked in the window after the crime.
That is right. That is exactly right. Do you understand that another piece of that puzzle is necessary? We need the smoking gun.
I remember the smoking gun lecture, and Max Wright is good in it.
Sure.
But like, what is the point of that scene of devoting that amount of time? It doesn't really even pay off in the sort of what happens. And there's just a whole lot of other legal business. Like they obviously care about making the courtroom procedure relatively realistic.
Sure.
And they make a point of explaining it's not a trial, but a preliminary hearing. And there's a lot of legal jargon. They rattle off he's charged with 5 counts of burglary, possession of stolen property, pandering, which is being a pimp, I think, which is interesting. That never comes up, but that's what, and I almost thought that they were lampshading it when Michael Pataki, Ivan, is on the stand.
Yeah.
Do you think that Sam Anderson and Stan Beeman got Ivan a new identity, and now he's in the Cincinnati Police Department?
Maybe that confirms that Ivan actually was KGB. He goes into law enforcement in the United States.
He goes into law enforcement. He keeps his cover pretty well when he sees Bailey again. Doesn't break. But he says, someone asks him about the modus operandi, and he laughs. He giggles and says, I find the use of Latin funny. Which, again, you got to take your last where you can get them in this episode. I wondered if that was like a call out to that they go to a lot of trouble to do all the law stuff right in this episode.
And again, it makes you wonder, what was the hour-long version of this like? Did it lay out a complete sort of trial from beginning to end? You know what I mean? Was it not just a preliminary? It really gets you thinking about what this could have been.
They need to be like Law and Order. Law and Order shows you you got to work really hard to get a whole court case settled in. And they're the masters at it, but you got to do a lot of dun-dun to get through a court case in an hour.
I think the other thing that, again, in comparing this to Who is Gordon Sims, at the center of Who is Gordon Sims, there's a real profound moral struggle, right? There's, why is Venus right to desert? Why was he right to leave 3 days before he was, set to go off of his tour of duty? And in this episode, Venus is just a helpless victim the entire time. Now maybe he showed poor judgment in putting a tape on in the booth and doing all this stuff that he shouldn't have done. Whether it's, sneaking Jessica into the station or robbing Gonzer's office. Maybe these are, but again, you think about sort of if you and I were put on trial and they brought up every single slightly dodgy judgment we've ever had in our lives, it's going to be a long trial. Yeah, it's going to be a tough trial. There's absolutely no racial or social aspect to it. And that's another place where this falls down. And we talked about the fact that both the prosecutor and one of the arresting officers is black.
Yeah. We wondered about just what to make of the black officer and the black prosecutor, black DA. Tim Reed, in addition to writing this episode, also apparently handled some of the production on it and some of the producer jobs, which meant that he was able to cast friends of his, including, we haven't mentioned it yet, his girlfriend and future wife, Daphne Maxwell, soon to be Mrs. Tim Reed. So, is this it could just be Tim Reed making a point of casting black actors.
Yes.
The guy that played the cop is apparently a friend of his.
Right.
Or he could be making a point about race. Or I thought, is it the opposite? Is it an attempt by someone else to sort of neutralize the racial persecution aspect of the plot? But even as I say that, like, the race thing note is not hit very much in the episode. There's maybe like one point when Mr. Carlson looks at the composite drawing. Even then, like, that's not what this, you just assume, it's Venus is in trouble with the law. Tim Reed wrote the episode. It's going to be about race, but it's really not at least in any way that I can see.
Yeah.
It is an odd duck of an episode.
The judge is a really familiar looking character actor.
Yeah. His name's Jack Crucian, sort of a very paternal, twinkle in his eye. You could see him being sort of Santa Claus, kind of ethnic, Greek father figure sort of thing.
Yeah.
But,
and again, like, in real life, if Jennifer, came across with the fact that she knew the judge, there might be a mistrial in their future. But the idea is that Jennifer, again, moves in these rarefied circles of judges and admirals, and she actually knows the judge from her sort of social circles, which... Right.
Then, of course, we have, as we said, Daphne Maxwell. I liked. I thought that she
smolders in this episode. Like she's evil. It's pretty great.
I thought you meant smolders in the other sense. I mean, she's a fine looking lady.
She's sexy and evil. Yes.
Yes. And Max Wright back again, and he does a lot with this weird, boring exposition. So I have a question, which I don't know if you can answer or not, but was Alf good? Like, was that show good or was it terrible?
I don't think
never watched it.
Let's put it this way: it was better than Small Wonder. I will stand by that. I mean,
that doesn't really answer the question.
I think that if you were a kid, about 11 years old, and you would dig Alf. I actually played Alf in a junior high production of Hollywood Squares.
Whoa.
Okay, this is probably one of those things I definitely...
How did this not come up with Leah?
I'm glad we got a chance to talk about it before the end of the podcast. It was like a 7th grade, like talent show production, and everybody played like different celebrities. And I don't know how I got stuck with Alf.
Did you choose? It was like...
I think I wanted to do my Alf impression, so there was a very popular stuffed animal of Alf back then. So it was very easy for me to crouch down behind the sort of top right square, I think I was, and kind of deliver my my wisecracks through the puppet. The sketch ended in a big brawl, and that allowed me to kind of cause the sort of Alf puppet to teeter and fall from the top right square.
Fling him Muppet-like.
Yeah, exactly. Yes, I mean,
yes.
I knew my forebears like Jim Henson and Frank Oz. I mean, that's what they would want me to do. So, but I did play Alf very briefly on the stage. I tripped the boards as Gordon Shumway. I don't know if Alf
can we talk to Alf now? Like, is Alf here now? Can we get a little?
I don't think I remember exactly how to do. I don't even know who did the voice for Alf. I feel like it was a fairly prominent voice artist, but whatever the case, I don't think we're going to get a chance to talk to Alf tonight, unfortunately.
Over to you, Mark, take it clear.
Okay, let's go with Alf.
Alf, Alf, if you were able to make another...
You know, John?
Yes?
I kid you.
Yes, you do.
I kid you because you're a good sport.
Oh, okay.
I was kidding you about how it doesn't require much intelligence to be a game show.
Well, you have said that rather articulately.
I take it all back.
Really?
It must be very hard.
Oh. Well, yeah, it's not really that hard. I think anybody could do it, really.
Really? I'd love to.
No, I wasn't asking you if you want to do it. I just said I think,
Well, all right. Sorry. Didn't mean to jump the gun.
All right.
But I still would love to.
Al?
Think about it.
I'm going to do something
Tom Kennedy on the line?
I'm going to do something.
Sorry?
I'm going to do something right now which our producers don't know about and which has never been done on a show before. Right after this commercial, Alf is going to host this show, the Hollywood. How's that?
I'm apoplectic.
Not half as stunned as we will be when you get up here, doesn't it?
Here's the thing about Alf. If you were 11 years old back then, you liked a wisecracking little furry guy who would hang around in a family and say all the things that you couldn't say because you were an 11-year-old kid and you wanted to behave.
And what was it? Was it kind of like Ed the Sock, Triumph the Insult, Comic Dogs kind of situation where the guy, everyone else has a script and the puppeteer is ad-libbing, is improving?
Maybe not so much ad-libbing as like he's the anarchic force, right? So like, and have you seen the movie Permanent Midnight about it's Ben Stiller plays Jerry Stahl. He was a Hollywood writer and he actually wrote for Alf while he was a heroin addict. And, it's a pretty wild movie. And basically one of the writers for Alf was pretty much completely messed up on heroin the entire time the series was going on.
Well, we talked about Max Wright's troubles.
Yeah, exactly.
It sounds like it's not a healthy
exactly.
place. Yeah.
It makes you wonder what the Small Wonder cast is up to these days. Probably dealing in black market organs in Southeast Asia or something like that, you know? Did you notice that Johnny basically was able to cadge like a bunch of information off of the cop to find out about the charges? I said, looks like he did a cop talk spend, Gumshoe style, to get his... He knows how to hang out with cops and kind of like, you know, get information off them or maybe slip them a double sawbuck or something like that to get information about how badly Venus is screwed at this point.
Yeah, that scene was another example of kind of there being different levels of seriousness going on. Because I just like felt so bad for Venus in that scene and felt like, Jesus, Johnny, take this seriously. You know, and,
take the beard off, for God's sake.
Like this is really looking bad for Venus, and everybody's like, you know, they're not quite getting it that he's that this is a bad situation. And at the end, when they're all sort of like, whew, they shake it off pretty quickly as they have to do because it's already the post credits scene.
That's right. I did like the very understated way though that Venus and Johnny kind of touched hands on the glass, like. That at the very end of the scene before Venus has to go back to the holding cell. It was well done. It was very subtle and I liked it a lot.
That's nice. Yeah. Kind of Kirk and Spock in
Star Trek 2.
Star Trek 2. Venus worked for Nixon once. Just add that to his list, to his convoluted backstory, but only because a good-looking girl asked him.
I was going to say, it was either that or he was making big bank as Sailor Ned and he wanted to keep more of his money, you know, for tax purposes. He didn't like what McGovern had in store for rich local TV stars.
Another random detail. Michael Pataki, the cop, says that they searched Venus's apartment, and I wrote down what they found. But I wasn't sure whether he had been framed or whether this is how elaborate the setup was. They didn't get into his apartment, so this must just be what he has. We never got to see Venus's apartment on the show. Right? We talked about that's like one of the only characters who we don't get to see their home. But we are told by Michael Pataki that his apartment contains Oriental porcelain, an antique gold coin collection, $11,134 in cash, and the usual furnishings and accoutrements, which all had a certain elegance.
So nice and vague, but the money thing. I mean, here's the thing. Venus has lived a life on the run. He knows the value of having a stash of cold, hard cash in case you need to get out of town quickly. Now, obviously, he didn't get out of town quickly enough to escape getting arrested, but at the same time, like, if anybody's going to have $11K in cash in their house.
That's funny. Why does Venus have an antique gold coin collection?
I just think he likes numismatics. I think he's just a fan of history and, you know.
Yeah. I mean, I am pleased and would accept nothing less than his furnishings having a certain elegance.
Yeah. The coins are a good investment, and so is the porcelain. You know what I mean? He's always thinking ahead, you know, like what's going to be valuable 20 years from now. Certain portable goods just never go out of style, you know.
Look, Les, I know you got a great nose for news, but you're also a little conspiracy-minded now, aren't you, huh? There's this thing called the Cincinnati Triangle. Things have begun to disappear from the Cincinnati Triangle.
What kind of things?
2 recreational vehicles, and Woody Hayes.
I'll start from the beginning. Of course, you've heard of the Central Intelligence Agency.
Our maid seems to think her mind is being controlled by Wally Schirra.
To make a long, internationally copyrighted story short, I was beamed aboard their spaceship, what they call a Get Gone, and transported to Ha-Cha-Cha number 3. That's what you people call Mars.
Well, I personally think it's a plot of some sort.
Rob, I think it's time for us to take our last trip into the Cincinnati Triangle. I'm very, very excited, but also kind of sad. I previewed the last 6 episodes of season 4. I don't think we're going to get as much concentrated weirdness as we do in this episode. We get a couple of little mentions when Jessica disappears. Johnny's theory is that maybe she got abducted by aliens, which I thought was, I mean, they've used that punchline before, but it was well delivered and it was a good way to kind of start the episode off. But I want to talk about that post-credit scene. That one, definitely, it got my feelers tingling. Les says,
well, they're talking
about the double, right? Yeah. They're talking about the fact that Venus has a double, which he really doesn't, but whatever.
Yeah, I got to go back and look. He doesn't look like him, right?
Not at all.
You're right. He's dressed a little bit like first season Venus.
Yeah.
But then they're talking about, have you ever met your double?
They do have a good one-liner. Johnny says, I met my doppelganger once, and Les goes, really? What did he look like?
What did he look like? That's right. But then Les comes out with, he says, I think everybody has a double. I think there's another universe just like ours right next door.
Yeah. This is great stuff. This just gets you wondering, man, is Les reading like John Keel books? Like, is he reading about like Tibetan bilocation and tulpas and all the rest of that stuff? I mean,
or it could be like physics, like the Everett.
Hugh Everett,
quantum interpretation, right? That there's a multiverse, there's an alternate universe right next to this one where every choice that you make is slightly different.
It's just delightful. Yeah, I mean, if anybody's going to have that theory, it's going to be Les, but. Like it does get me thinking, and you put it in the notes here. And, if the alternate WKRP universe right next door is indeed the traditional mirror universe where everybody's got goatees
and evil, right? Because this is, it appears that if Les thinks that doubles just come from the mirror universe, then is Les's explanation for what happened is that an alternate universe Venus, an evil Venus robbed the jewelry store.
Exactly. So like, what does the mirror universe WKRP look like? Oh, what a great question.
Yes, because we've already, we saw the Tantalus field way back in the burglary episode. Agonizing.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So if there was like a classic Star Trek mirror universe with goatees and everything, does a big guy have like a gold swashbuckler sash and Jennifer is the captain's woman?
Yeah, that would be it, right? Like the big guy he'd be absolutely evil. Like he would be not just evil, but calculatingly evil. Like he would be one of those like thinks 5 moves ahead, has traps laid for everyone. He would never relinquish command of the ship. He would have killed his mother. Like it would have been a whole thing, right? All right.
I was about to say, well, what would his mother be like? But
he would have dispatched with her a long time ago. Probably using poison, I would imagine, something like that. Poison in the brandy. So like Johnny what would evil or mirror universe Johnny be like?
Yeah. So I guess the idea is we keep them. Are they the opposites of themselves?
They're the opposites, but they keep some kind of essential kernel of sort of what they are,
right?
Right.
And they grew up in this evil world where everything is evil,
right?
And yes, Riptide is a pretty good. That's right. We already have the mirror universe Johnny. He's Riptide, sure. And because Johnny does turn into a jerk pretty easily, so that's the evil within him.
Yes. And that means he would have a streak of good like Spock in the mirror universe.
Yeah. Yep.
Very
that's
nice.
right. So that's the evil Johnny.
Now, I think mirror universe Les. Like I don't know how much Red Dwarf you've watched, but there's the evil Rimmer who's like a sexual like deviant who like, wants to whip everybody. And I think that Mirror Universe Les would just be like a libertine, right? He would be all of that stuff we were talking about in the last episode, all of that sort of repression and everything would be gone. And he would just be like the sort of evil pansexual sort of like, sadist essentially.
That's right.
And Bailey would be, gosh, like I don't even want to think about Mirror Universe Bailey. It hurts me too much,
Yeah. Well, I mean, the thing that they would probably just do, it's not super interesting. In one sense, it's interesting. Is it usually the Mirror Universe? It's an excuse to just sex up the female character.
Yeah.
So Mirror Universe Bailey would, I don't, she'd just be.
Well, it's Sex Hair Bailey from.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mirror Universe Andy would be really interesting. Like every part of his life, he would have met interesting people and like gone interesting places, and he would be the most interesting man in the world, basically. He would be the guy from the Dos Equis ads.
He might be gone. It might be that Mirror Universe Andy and Mirror Universe Arthur couldn't both be there. That one of them would have had to take the other one out.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Or else he'd have teamed up with Mama Carlson or something like that. He'd be like her boy toy and...
oh, man, that's...
So that's the Mirror Universe WKRP. Folks.
We've done so many alternate WKRPs at this point. We could actually have a tournament of alternate WKRPs to see which one comes out on top.
It's a Crisis on Infinite WKRPs.
Oh, that's perfect.
Hey, thanks for listening, everybody. We'll be back soon with more WKRP riffs and memories. If you like this well enough to listen to the whole thing, tell somebody about it.
We're online at holdmyorderterribledresser.com, which, believe it or not, wasn't taken. We're also available on iTunes, and we always appreciate your iTunes subscriptions, reviews, ratings, and downloads. So get on there and give us some stars.
Good day, and may the good news be yours.
If you've ever wondered whatever became of me, I'm living on the air in Cincinnati, WKRP. I'm at WKRP in Cincinnati.